In the history of crime, we've seen brothers and cousins killed together as a team, such as Hillside Stranglers, Kenneth Bianchi, and Angelo Bueno, or the Lewingdons in Ohio. But while a few grifting families have killed repeatedly together, familial teams are less likely to occur than teams who are married or romantically involved. The only family known thus far in the U.S. that produced two serial killers at separate times in unrelated incidents was the Raines family in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Only one book has been devoted to the case, and newspapers like the Kalamazoo Gazette covered the incidents, but few collections of serial murder even mention them. Michael Newton is the exception. He notes that others have listed them as the Searle brothers, Ralph and Tommy, accepting the names that Conrad Hilberry assigned to them to protect identities, as per his agreement with Larry when he wrote the book Luke Karamazov. Dr. Hilberry, who lives in the town where both brothers were tried, says that he took on the project after a colleague offhandedly remarked that someone ought to write a book about the murders while all the principal people were still around, because this case was likely going to be unique in the annals of crime. He was right, and thanks to Hilberry, not only the case, but also a sense of the times was preserved. In a later section, we interview Hilberry about his experience of speaking with both brothers. In any event, we'll take the brothers one at a time. Larry Raines is first. His full story came out after the discovery of a murdered man in Kalamazoo, Michigan on May 30th, 1964. At around 5 p.m. on that Saturday afternoon, a patrol officer made a routine inspection of what appeared to be an abandoned Chevrolet. He saw bloodstains on the bumper and personal papers scattered on the front seat, so he had the car towed to a nearby police post. Mrs. Gary Smock was in the police station making a missing persons report at the same time that the officer called in the discovery, and she said it sounded like her husband's car. He had been missing since the night before. At the post, the car's trunk was popped, and inside was the body of a white male lying on his face in a pool of fresh blood. From items in the car, he was identified as the missing Gary Smock, a 30-year-old junior high school teacher from Plymouth, Michigan. He'd been shot in the head, just below the ear, and the autopsy indicated that the bullet had come from a .22 caliber weapon. A cord was wrapped around one wrist as if he'd been tied, and his shoes were missing. Later, it was determined that his watch was gone as well. The pathologist estimated that Smock had died within 5 minutes of the shooting, sometime between 6 a.m. Saturday morning and 2 p.m. that afternoon. The police did a door-to-door canvass of hotels and motels in the immediate area to attempt to reconstruct the last days of Smock's life. They learned that on Friday he'd been on his way to the home of his in-laws in Allegan, leaving from an appointment in Battle Creek with the Chamber of Commerce. He'd been there looking for accommodations for a future Church of God youth convention and had a Chamber of Commerce map of local facilities in his car. He'd mentioned to officials in Battle Creek that he had to be at a family dinner. Yet Smock's wife, Thelma, heard from him around 6 p.m. Friday evening. He told her he wouldn't make it home for dinner, but would arrive shortly. There's no other witness report until later that night when his car is reportedly seen at a Kalamazoo service station around 11 p.m. and the attendant recalled seeing two people in the car. This report would turn out to be in error. A palm print and fingerprint were lifted from the car and were later determined to belong to someone other than the victim or members of Smock's family, so police were hopeful that it would match a perpetrator. Another bullet was recovered from the floor of the car's trunk, and while Smock's billfold was empty, a check had been written on Friday evening to cash for $11. Early that Saturday morning, around 60 miles away in Elkhart, Indiana, service station attendant Charles Snyder had been shot twice in the head, also with a .22. Given the half tank of gas in Smock's car, police estimated that it had gone at least 100 miles after being filled at 11 a.m., assuming that was correct. Agencies from both states were coordinating efforts to learn if the same gun had fired the recovered bullets from both scenes. The Indiana killer had gotten away with $100. In less than a week, thanks to a tip from a local resident, they had nabbed the perpetrator. 19-year-old Larry Lee Raines, prone to impulsive violence, had been hitchhiking across the country over the past 3 months. On Thursday, June 4th, he went to the home of an acquaintance, Arthur Booth, and confessed that he'd killed some people. He was going to see a priest and then commit suicide. Near midnight, Booth managed to alert the police. Rains was arrested at Booth's home wearing Smock's stolen watch and shoes. While he had only 15 cents on him, he readily admitted to the killing of both men and surrendered his .22 caliber handgun. Police sent it for testing. Rains said that Smock had offered him a ride, and he'd forced the man to drive onto a country road and robbed him of $3. Then he ordered Smock into the trunk of the car and instructed him to be quiet. When the man started thumping to make himself heard, Rains stopped on a lonely road outside Kalamazoo, tied him up, and shot him in the head. He shot twice, but the first one missed. Then he shut the body into the trunk. That was between 8 and 9 p.m. Hungry, he got a hamburger and then drove to Indiana, waited until the early morning hours to kill a gas station attendant there for money, and returned to Kalamazoo. The dead man was found by a group of fishermen who stopped for gas, so the police were alerted immediately. They called for roadblocks. Rains said that he'd been waved through one of these roadblocks with Smock still in the trunk. He just acted at ease, and they told him to move on. He returned to the point at which he'd met Smock and abandoned the car, hitchhiking from there into Kalamazoo. He realized there was blood on the bumper, but didn't want to stick around any longer to clean it up. He simply didn't care, he said. After extensive interrogation, Rains was bound over to circuit court. He said he didn't want a lawyer, so psychiatric examinations were scheduled. Then he changed his mind and asked for a public defender. Eugene Field was appointed, but the examination went ahead before Field arrived. Even before Rains was caught, investigators had speculated over whether Smock's killer had also shot and killed a service station attendant on April 6th in Battle Creek. Vernon Leben, 20, was shot with a .22 and was working at an I-94 interchange near where Smock had been driving. Rains readily confessed to that crime as well. Then he added 2 more in 2 other states. One man had picked him up near Death Valley on May 23rd and kept talking about the fact that he had no money, so Rains shot him. His body remained missing for over 2 years. The other was another gas station attendant in Kentucky. While Rains had no criminal record, throughout his adolescence, he'd been a known troublemaker. He'd grown up in Woodward, Michigan, in an abusive and unstable home, and was a year younger than his brother Danny. They were close, but they also competed aggressively, both loving and hating each other. In a prison interview with Hilbury, Larry said, "I used to hit Danny with boards, throw knives at him, shoot him with bows and arrows, and shit like that." Once he was of age to leave home, Larry had tried the military, but ended up in the stockade for the latter part of his stint before he was discharged. He'd also developed an obsession with a married woman both before and after his military experience. Then, feeling that his life might not last very long, indeed he had suicidal thoughts in one attempt, he started to wander, taking 3 months to hitchhike across into Ohio, Kentucky, and over to Nevada. He later claimed that had someone noticed what his suicide attempt was about, he might have been treated and thus prevented from committing the murders. In other words, he blamed others for his own acts, although he once admitted to Hilbury his moral shortcomings. "There has to be some part of me left out." Haynes was charged in only the Smock murder, with other charges in reserve pending the results of the trial. Mounted posses from the sheriff's department combed the area west of Kalamazoo where Rains had indicated he'd killed Smock, looking for physical evidence of the shooting. Rains had indicated that as he was robbing Smock, he tossed a flashlight from the car. They didn't find it. At the end of September, the trial began in Kalamazoo County Circuit Court. Assistant Prosecutor Donald Burge had prepared a set of 20 color slides depicting the body of Gary Smock. Eugene Field objected to their graphic nature, stating they would inflame the jury. The judge admitted 12 of the slides. The courtroom battle centered largely around the question of Rains' sanity. Through Field, he pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, and several psychologists testified that he'd committed murder prior to periods of temporary insanity that had occurred thanks to his rage against a father who had beat him mercilessly. In fact, Rains' father had once been a gas station attendant, which supported this defense, as did the fact that his victims had resembled his father. Hilbury read the transcripts and was able to summarize Rains' approach to life. During prison interviews, Hilbury perceived that Rains needed to manipulate and control, and his pre-prison violence had been impulsive and lacking in direction or support. There was never a plan, Rains admitted about his murders. It was a natural thing. It always seemed to me like I was an actor in a play. He even expressed a somewhat technical interest in what happened to his victims when shot. The blood flew farther than he expected in one case, and another young man bounced a couple of feet in the air. He had no remorse for what he'd done. Rains was convicted of Smock's murder and given a life sentence. He appealed it based on the fact that the prosecutor's psychiatrist had started to examine him before he was properly represented by counsel, and he won a new trial in 1971. But when it became clear to him that his insanity plea wasn't very strong, he pled guilty and received a new life sentence. The concession he received was to be allowed to change his name, and he chose Monk Steppenwolf, based on a novel by German author Hermann Hesse that had impressed him. Published in 1927, Steppenwolf provided a literary way for Hesse to explore the gap between physical and mental reality. He described his main character's struggle with bridging that gap with emotion, sensual experience, and spiritual transcendence. Yet Steppenwolf was autobiographical as well, following on the heels of several crises that had occurred in Hesse's life. His first and second marriages had both collapsed, after which he began to frequent the bars of Zurich. He became a suicidal alcoholic and finally retreated to his home in Switzerland to become a monkish recluse. The novel follows Henry Heller, a middle-aged intellectual in despair who views himself as a wolf of the steppes, estranged from a world that he can't understand. All seems futile to him and depressing. In this world, he finds no source of joy, though the human part of him is still attracted to the comforts of socializing. Feeling disoriented by this inner tension, he contemplates suicide. Just before he manages it, he meets a hedonistic girl who charms him to the point where he agrees to obey her every command. She tells him that he'll one day agree to kill her. He freely indulges in a sensual lifestyle and begins to enjoy his newfound freedom. Even so, he acknowledges that he's losing touch with the spiritual. During immersion into a magic theater that distorts everything, he finds the girl and kills her, as he believes she wants him to do. He's then chastised inside this hallucinatory world for excessively serious behavior. In essence, this novel explores the idea that an individual is comprised of a multitude of selves, and via a transmigration of souls, can pass into several forms. All of life is a compromise of some type, and there are several chances to keep trying to get it right. Laughter is the key to opening the doors. A rock band, also called Steppenwolf, formed during the late 1960s when existential ideas were in vogue, with hit songs such as Born to Be Wild and Magic Carpet Ride. That band's founder, John Kay, had been born in Germany, and he named his band after Hesse's novel. The music challenged cultural values and expressed the spiritual restlessness of the era. Henry Haller, in fact, had an affinity with music, and he even meets his idol, Mozart, in the Magic Theater. Music offers humankind the transcendent world of the spiritual. The novel, as well as the group, intended to mirror people back to themselves so they can see and move into other possibilities. Within his limited realm of incarceration, Rains apparently found a new way to be himself. Via Hesse's ideas, one could even be absolved of murder. By this time, it was his older brother's turn. Danny Rains was said to be equally angry from the abuse received at the hands of their father. In their home in Kalamazoo, they were the middle two children of four. The oldest and youngest were girls. Their father was an alcoholic who got mean when he drank and would hit whomever was close by. Each of the kids took a share of the abuse before the man finally walked out, but by that time, the damage was done. He'd modeled the use of violence to get through life, and the boys took out their frustrations on each other. Danny Rains went to prison for assault and was paroled early in 1972 when he was 28. Within a month, he committed another crime. Most of the details came from Brent Coster, 15 at the time, who said that shortly after he'd met Rains in June, Rains had described the incident to him in detail, even showing him where it had occurred at the east side of a store. In March, Patricia Hawk, 29, left home with her 17-month-old son, Corey, to do some shopping. Rains accosted and stabbed her to death, leaving her son to wander aimlessly until an elderly woman found him the next day and called the police. The boy had blood on him, so they searched for his mother and found Hawk's body behind the independent elevator company building. Her husband had reported her missing. Her billfold was missing, so robbery seemed a possible motive. Coster said that Danny bragged about having committed that crime. He'd seen the woman go to a Tops department store and had parked his blue Corvair van next to her car to wait. An hour went by and she came out and put her son into the passenger seat. As she came around to the driver's side where the van was, Danny got out, walked up to her, and pulled a knife. She panicked and fell into the car, but he pulled her out and forced her to get into his van, where he bound and raped her. He left her bound with her hands in front of her as he forced her into the front. He tried to strangle her, but she fought him, scratching his face. They struggled so hard that they fell out of the van to the ground. Rain stabbed her in the back, but he said that it didn't seem to have much effect, so he gave the knife a twist to wreak more damage. That did it, he claimed. Somehow the child had gotten out of the car and was standing near the van, crying. Danny figured that the boy wouldn't recall anything because he was too young, so he left him alone. Finally, Hawk stopped struggling and expired. Coster said that Danny had bragged how well the method had worked and suggested that they do a similar deed together. They could grab a girl, rape her, take her money and valuables, and then kill her. Coster's 6'6" frame, which had earned him the nickname Stretch, may have been influential since he looked as if he could subdue anyone. Coster agreed to try it, so they put together a kit with knives, trash bags, and ropes, and went cruising. However, in one trial, Coster admitted that Rains told him about this incident in July, after they had committed 2 murders. He said that they had once parked in front of a movie theater for 4 hours looking for an opportunity and often went looking for female hitchhikers. They passed the time with talk about sex and killing women, although Coster says that Rains initiated most of it. As they roamed around, the police were still trying to solve Hawk's murder. On May 2nd, the triple homicide of a family in a nearby town, Cassopolis, had the police speculating over whether the killings were related to the Hawk incident. Timothy Roderick and his wife, 9 months pregnant, were bound and slashed through the throats as their 2 children, ages 2 and 3, had watched. Dr. William Glazer performed the autopsies and said there were some similarities between the 2 crimes. However, a man who had been living with the family had disappeared, so he was the immediate suspect. He was arrested in Florida and quickly tied to the triple murder, and it appeared that there was no link to Hawk. On July 17th, motorcycle riders in the woods near Galesburg, Michigan, came across an abandoned blue Opel Kadett with the decomposed bodies of 2 young women in the back seat. The car's registration was traced to a Chicago area man who had reported his daughter missing. She'd gone with her roommate to see her brother in Ann Arbor, but had never arrived. Fingerprints helped to identify Linda Clark and Claudia Bidstrup, both 19. One was the daughter of a Chicago police detective. An autopsy was unable to find the cause of death, but ropes around their necks indicated that they'd been strangled. The girls had been murdered more than a week before they were found, so the chances of pinning down leads were grim. The gas tank was full, so it was surmised that they'd encountered their killer not far from there. The police began to check the immediate area. What they didn't know, and would learn only 7 weeks later, was that the girls had been the victims of Rains and Coster. On July 5th, Danny was at work at the Sprinkle Road service station when Linda Clark and Claudia Bidstrup pulled in around 1:30 a.m. to get gas. Coster filled the tank while Rains popped the hood, both of them preparing for what they were going to do. Rains dismantled a wire to the spark plugs, making the car sound as if it had a problem. He then had the girls drive the car into the bay so he could have a closer look. When they did so, the 2 men pulled knives. Rains told them not to scream and they wouldn't be harmed. He then instructed them to get into the back seat and drove the car to the back of the station where the lights were off. Coster and Rains tied them up. One of them kept watch on the girls while the other attended to customers. Coster saw Rains assaulting Linda and said later that Rains had told him that he'd also had sex with Claudia. Coster then had sex with Linda in the van. Rains put Claudia back into the car and Coster killed her there because Rains had told him it was time for him to taste the medicine. He attempted without success to strangle her with a rope, so as she struggled to live, Rains assisted and together they killed her. They then turned their attentions to Linda, and Coster managed to strangle her on his own. They put both women into the backseat of the Opel, covered them with a blanket, and Coster drove the car himself to a wooded area near Galesburg. He poured gasoline over it and lit a cigarette. This he placed on the floor of the car and left before he knew if it had ignited the accelerant. He hitchhiked back. Rains then showed him money, 2 rings, a pair of earrings, and some photographs that he'd taken from the victims. When the car was found, the girls' purses were empty of money. The police and press considered that this incident could be related to the Hawk murder. All the victims had been similarly tied, but the girls from Chicago were too decomposed to determine if they'd been raped or how they'd been killed. Their deaths brought to 12 the number of murders in Kalamazoo County over the past 8 months, considered significantly high. 8 remained unsolved, but there was another to come. Rains and Coster repeated their act on August 5th, kidnapping 18-year-old Patricia Fearnow. As they were riding around, they saw her hitchhiking on the Western Michigan University campus, a common practice for college students in those days. They picked her up and used a knife to take her against her will to a wooded area. Coster tied her up in the back of the van, covered her with a sleeping bag, and then lay next to her as Danny drove. Over a period of 6 hours, both of them raped her, and when they were finished, they tied her up and took her to another wooded area near a lake. Coster claimed that while they drank beer, she had a glass of wine, and by the end of the day had finished the bottle. When they went to a third area, Fearnow started to scream and struggle against her bonds, so Rains slugged her hard in the stomach. That failed to subdue her, so Coster placed a plastic bag over her head to suffocate her. Rains left the van, and when Fearnow fell quiet, Coster followed him. Then Rains looked inside the van. The woman was dead, so they placed her a ways away from the van onto the ground. Rains said that he'd seen a police cruiser, so Coster ran away. Apparently, the police stopped to check Rains's ID and let him go. He encountered the same patrol officer 4 times before he returned to the trailer, where, according to the Kalamazoo Gazette, he and Coster resided together. Coster called him later to get a ride home. Coster was a runaway, so it wasn't clear where he lived during this time. They went back the next day to move the body to a more secluded area, at which time Coster found 2 ropes around the victim's neck. He recalled placing only one there and believed that Danny had added the second one. Not long afterward, their relationship ended, and by Labor Day weekend on September 4th, he and Danny were arrested for the double homicide that had occurred in July. Upon investigating service stations close to where the car had been found, they noted Danny's record. In 1967, he was convicted in another state of pointing a gun at a couple, and the following year he'd served time for a felony in connection with the abduction of a 17-year-old student. Investigators learned that Coster often hung out at the service station with Rains, so they brought both in for questioning. The police did not yet know about Fearnow. Rains had not chosen his cohort carefully. Coster was assigned an attorney, James Hills, who told him that if he offered details truthfully, he'd be allowed to plead to second-degree murder to one of the homicides, which came with a lesser sentence, and the other charge would be dropped. Coster said he was bothered by what they'd done. However, it took until October 18th before he showed them Fearnow's body, not yet found. The police knew that she was missing because her friends had reported that they hadn't heard from her since August 5th after she went out on an errand. Her remains at this point were in skeletal condition, but her jawbone assisted in making an identification. The location proved to be at Morrow Lake, less than a mile from where the other 2 girls had been dumped. Coster named Danny Rains as the instigator. He said that shortly after this murder in August, he'd broken off with Rains because Rains wanted him to steal a car and go to Florida. Coster was afraid that Rains had in mind to kill him too. He also told detectives about Rains's confession to him of the murder of Patricia Hawk. Rains was charged that day with this 4th murder. Since Coster was only 15, Hills wanted to keep him in juvenile court, but Kalamazoo County Prosecutor Donald Burge petitioned the probate court to waive him into adult court given the brutal nature of his crimes. His request was approved, in part because Coster had a previous criminal history of burglary and car theft, including a felony. Hills appealed this decision while Coster was taken to jail to be held without bond. At the time, the Michigan Supreme Court was reviewing its policies about juvenile waivers, specifically with regard to their constitutionality, because the current law offered no guidelines for who could be waived into adult court and who couldn't, so there was a chance that Coster's case could be salvaged. Even so, the concept under consideration was that the juvenile system couldn't hold an offender beyond the age of 19, and some crimes could not be reasonably treated if the offender was destined to be in the system only 2 or 3 years. Thus, it wasn't the principle behind the waiver that was the problem, but only its lack of formal standards. Danny Rains protested that he was not a killer, but he ended up in a maximum security cell in the same county jail where his brother was awaiting his retrial, having not yet pled guilty. They were in cells number 1 and number 2. But unlike Larry, Danny would not capitulate. He continued to insist that he was innocent. Nevertheless, he went to his first trial in February 1973 for the murder of Patricia Hawk, with Coster the chief witness to testify against him. Coster had not been there at the time, nor had he even known Rains, but he testified that Rains had described the incident to him, and it fit the physical evidence. The Gazette covered the proceedings. During Coster's testimony, reporter Dave Hager wrote, "Rains sat at the courtroom table. He smiled to himself and shook his head as if he couldn't believe what Coster was saying." Kathy Rains, Danny's former wife, also testified. She said that a few days after the Hawk murder, she'd noticed a scratch on her husband's face while they were riding in the car. He claimed it had happened when he'd torn down a garage for his mother and stepfather, but added that it scared him. He also admitted that his mother had suspected him of killing the woman at Tops and told him he'd better have a good alibi. Rains' attorney tried to undermine her by getting her to admit that she'd been seen by a psychiatrist and had smoked pot. Dr. Daniel Glaster, the pathologist who performed the autopsy, testified that Patricia Hawk had died from a stab wound into her back that was so deep it had gone nearly through her entire body. He'd also documented bruises on many parts of her body and jaw and ligature marks around her wrists and neck. A member of the crime lab, David Metzger, had found traces of semen on her panties. In addition, in January, a guard found a torn-up note in the toilet bowl of Rains' jail cell in his handwriting that indicated that he was trying to find a woman who would lie for him for money and give him an alibi for the night of Hawk's murder. She'd also have to say that he already had the Band-Aid on his cheek, circumventing any idea that he'd been scratched that day. He wanted a strong woman who would not let the police intimidate her. Rains received 2 convictions in this case, murder in the perpetration of rape and second-degree murder, receiving 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Rains' trial for the murder of Linda Fearnow took place in July 1973, and again, Coster was the state's key witness against him. Coster offered details about the time that they'd spent with her and how they'd assaulted and killed her. It matched the physical evidence, what little there was. Also taking the stand were 2 men who had discussed the incident with Rains during a stint in the county jail. Richard Fee, 17, said that Coster asked him to lie and say that Coster had told him that he'd lied about Rains' involvement. Rains had been with the woman, he said, but only for the sex, and when he'd gone to get beer and wine, Coster had killed her. The other man, Lee Keaton, 28, stated that Rains had asked him before the first trial to hire someone to kill Coster. In his trial, Rains was convicted on July 21st of first-degree murder, adding a 3rd life sentence. He now faced a trial for the double homicide. Back in March, Coster had addressed a preliminary hearing about the girls from Chicago, Linda Clark and Claudia Bidstrup. He said that Rains had made plans to ensnare a female customer at the Sprinkle Road service station where he worked a late shift. They had experimented with the lights there to give them an advantage. In this case, unlike the others, there was also damning physical evidence. A blanket belonging to Rains had covered the bodies, and the rope used on their necks matched the rope he'd given to his stepfather. In addition, a patrol officer saw him in that area by his van. Apparently, the evidence was potent, for in August, Rains pled no contest to reduced charges of second-degree murder, receiving 2 more life sentences. He told a reporter who probed for his response, There's really nothing to say. Coster had agreed to plead no contest to second-degree murder in the incident involving the girls from Chicago, but his attorney appealed his waiver from juvenile to adult court, putting his case on hold for the time being. He remained in the county jail. While the Michigan Supreme Court had agreed to hear arguments about Coster's juvenile waiver, no decision about just when that would occur had been made. In 1975, questions were raised once again regarding the criminal proceedings against him, and his attorney, James Hills, requested a delay in his pleading to the second-degree murder charge. However, Kalamazoo Circuit Court Judge Patrick McCauley denied the request and ordered a trial to commence in June or July. In June, still uncertain about his appeal, Coster offered a guilty plea, and on July 25th, McCauley sentenced Coster to life in prison with a recommendation that he never be paroled. He was visibly disappointed. Just before he was transported to Jackson Prison, he asked a reporter from the Kalamazoo Gazette, "All I ask is that you don't make me look like a hardened criminal when you write the story." He admitted he'd hoped for a term of 15 to 25 years, but said that even with his life sentence, there was a built-in parole consideration after 10 years. Coster had been a runaway when Raines had befriended him. At the age of 15, he was game for anything. He'd already stolen cars and had committed over a dozen burglaries, so he was out of control and fairly easy for an older man to manipulate. Even so, he couldn't offer a reason when asked why he'd participated in rape and murder on 2 occasions. "There's a reason for everything, but I can't pin one on that." Some people believe that he wouldn't have graduated to murder had he never crossed paths with Danny Raines, but others saw him as equally culpable. After spending 48 years in prison, the 64-year-old Coster was released from the G. Robert Cotton Correctional Facility on January 21, 2021. Raines had plenty of time to do legal research in his prison cell in Marquette Branch Prison in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. He argued that 2 convictions for the Hawk murder constituted double jeopardy, so in 1979, Judge Donald Anderson canceled the second-degree murder conviction, and with it went one of Raines's life sentences. But Raines was not done. In 1981, the Supreme Court set aside the other conviction in the Hawk case. They ruled that the trial judge had failed to tell jurors they could consider second-degree murder as a possible verdict for the charge of murder while perpetrating rape. That decision meant that the prosecution could either retry him on the same count or give him a sentence of second-degree murder, which carried the possibility of parole. 2 of his other 3 sentences did as well. Only the Fear Now conviction assured that he would remain in prison for life. The prosecutor believed that retrying such an old case would be difficult since the primary evidence was testimony from a convicted murderer also serving a life sentence. He opted for the sentence. They could only hope that Raines could not think of a way to undo the Fear Now conviction. Raines continued to insist on his innocence, and some researchers who went over the investigation began to side with him, criticizing the investigators for so readily believing Coster's story. During the mid-1970s, Larry Raines agreed to talk with an English professor, Conrad Hilbery, who contacted him. At first he was hesitant, but then decided that some good purpose might be served, so he invited Dr. Hilbery to the prison to discuss his family history on the condition that it be a serious study about the inner workings of his mind. He himself was interested in understanding why he could so calmly kill someone, yet I'm very reluctant to hurt someone. Yet what he actually wanted was to get his story out to the public in the way that he devised. When Hilbery arrived, he described Larry thus. His hair was long, well down over his ears. A mustache and a pointed Van Dyke beard gave him a faintly Mephistophelian look. Raines immediately explained the name change to Monk Steppenwolf as a way to get out from under the bad reputation he'd experienced as a kid, which had made him hate his name. The new name intrigued people and garnered some respect, which was reinforced by the dark glasses he always wore. Hilbery's impression on several occasions was that Larry wanted to control all aspects of the interview. He questioned everything and gave careful instructions. He also seemed happier when their conversations were recorded. Hilbery was also struck by the eerie casualness with which he accommodated himself to murder. Hilbery spoke to both brothers and to the legal and prison personnel involved in Larry's case. He also spoke to Kathy Raines, once married to Danny and now married to Larry. He had distinct impressions of them all, which he recorded in the book. Larry, the youngest boy in the family, was a loner who had developed a sense of distance from life. When the family dog was run over, for example, he felt nothing. His mother worked full-time on the evening shift in the paper factory, and though Larry and others rarely saw her, he recalled that she was disorganized and ill-equipped to deal with a family or an alcoholic husband. The father apparently tormented the boys and became easily enraged when they failed to obey as fast as he wanted them to. He also beat their mother and destroyed furniture, as well as picked fights with other men. He seemed to enjoy humiliating the boys, as well as scaring them and forcing them into difficult situations, including drinking alcohol. Although he finally abandoned them when Larry was 9 and had shown them no legitimate way in which to earn approval or self-esteem, he'd left lasting damage. Nevertheless, Larry didn't buy the psychiatric argument that his murders were the result of displaced anger at his father. He told Hilbury that the gas stations and men who had picked him up had just been easiest to rob. There are some people who believe Danny's assertion of his innocence. Reportedly, a police officer doing graduate work in criminology researched the investigation and apparently had doubts about the case made against Danny, but he declined the opportunity to speak about it. Given the physical evidence, along with the note that Danny ripped up, it seems odd that someone in law enforcement would discount that. Hilbury thought that Danny was a fast talker, using his facility with language as a way to persuade others and himself. My own impression, Hilbury writes, is that he's urgently and persistently rethinking the past, going over the events in his mind and rearranging them, changing them so that the story comes out the way it ought to, rather than the way it was. He didn't believe that Danny was the psychopath that Larry was because he didn't exhibit the same shallow affect. But his understanding of psychopathy derives from an outdated source, and the work done during the 1980s and 1990s indicates that psychopathy can take a variety of forms. Danny's behavior, in terms of glibness, deception, slick convoluted reasoning, self-pity, and irresponsibility, indicates that he may certainly earn that diagnosis as well. Despite Larry's desire to kill Danny if he ever got out of prison, from Hilbury's description, Danny seems just as dangerous and perhaps more cunning. Several people who knew or spoke with Danny surmised that his competitiveness with his brother may have triggered his own murder spree. Larry had gotten considerable publicity in 1964, and then with a successful appeal in 1971, he was getting even more. It was right around the time that he was brought back to the Kalamazoo jail that Danny began his own spate of murders. He'd been in trouble before, but not to this magnitude. And yet, if he were truly competitive in the way that serial killers often are, he'd have accepted credit for his murders and perhaps even added to as a way to one-up his brother. Since he protests his innocence even now, it seems unlikely that competition with Larry was the driving force. A prisoner who encountered Danny and who asked to remain anonymous said that Danny was reclusive and liked to wear a cowboy hat. He was also good at making leather crafts and had a pet parakeet for a while. He spent a lot of effort fighting his 4 murder convictions, claiming that his court-appointed public defender had had no experience with murder convictions and that he'd been unable to get the court to accept a request to get discovery under the case, Brady v. Maryland. He went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court with his appeal, but the court rejected the case based on a lack of evidence that the trial court had actually denied him discovery. Danny had married a girl, Kathy, and they had 3 children together. But in 1971, before he commenced his murder spree, she divorced him. Yet she continued to see him, and thus she noticed the scratch on his cheek just after the Hawk murder. She testified against him in court and told Hilbury that she had vague impressions on 2 occasions in 1972 that Danny had murdered someone. Those impressions had coincided with the times of the murders. After one incident, he'd forgotten to pick up the boys for his time with them. After leaving him, she'd married another man, a union that produced another child, but that had lasted only 2 years, and she found herself getting involved with Larry. They finally married in March 1975, and she took the last name Steppenwolf. She told Hilbury that in school, of the 2 Raines brothers, she'd been drawn to Larry, who was more reclusive and quiet. but he apparently didn't return her interest sufficiently to hook up with her. Kathy attended Larry's trial in 1964 as much as she could, hardly believing that he was capable of 5 murders. When Larry went to prison, she was ready for Danny's attentions. He moved in with her, and soon she was pregnant, so they got married. But eventually, she and Larry started to write each other and apparently fell in love via correspondence. This became a source of fights between Kathy and Danny, and was yet one more thing over which the brothers had to compete. Then Hilbury received word in 1979 from Larry Monk that he no longer had a wife, meaning that Kathy had ended their marriage. He was awaiting a visit from a woman whom he calculated would become his next wife and was married again by 1980. While the details of the breakup with Kathy are unknown, it was clear in Hilbury's book that she'd maintained the hope that Larry would one day be free, while he stated quite clearly that he had no desire to be out of prison. Surely this produced some tension, but it's also the case that some women married to men behind bars tire of having an unavailable husband, or they meet someone who offers more and they end the prison relationship. It's likely that the Raines brothers will hold their special place in criminal history as the only 2 brothers who separately became serial killers in a way that offers no easy explanation of their repetitive crimes. Cruel fathers and clumsy mothers don't necessarily cause children to become so violent. It's an intriguing mystery. Larry Raines died at the Saginaw Correctional Facility on November 12, 2023. His brother, Danny Raines, died of natural causes at Lakeland Correctional Facility on January 29, 2022. He was 78 years old.